Mr. Royce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask a question of Mr. McPhee, and this goes to a concern that we often hear out in California from our banking community, and the basic gist of it is, you know, there's $3 trillion in commercial real estate loans out that are on banks' balance sheets, or they're securitized through MBS, and we're going to have 1.4 trillion of that roll over between now and 2013, and this is what banks communicate to me. They say we have, you know, we have to go out there and get a new appraisal on the property value. These are performing loans. In many cases, they're performing loans. But we can't roll these loans over because, you know, even though the revenue coming from the property remains strong, we've got overzealous regulators leaning on us, and so we cut off the credit, and we're creating in that process, according to any number of bankers that I've talked to, we're creating something of a vicious circle, because the more we close down access, the more we refuse to roll over these loans that are performing, the more we're impacting these communities. And it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy if we continue to do enough of this. And so the question they have is, you know, do we have to be so doctrinaire in terms of this concept that, you know, we know that the value of the property, you know, there's no market out there for the property. So by definition, we can't meet that test. Now, we've had a number of discussions back here with regulators in Washington. But their point is the discussions we have with regulators in Washington never seem to reach, you know, the front, never seem to reach out in at least the Southwest, where they're dealing with very overzealous regulators telling them that this is the way they've got to do business. And again, their point is, let us be bankers. Let us make these judgments on our own. You're creating this lack of liquidity in the system. And I was wondering, Mr. McPhee, have you heard a certain number of these complaints? I would suspect you might have.
Yes, sir. Being a community banker in any one of these states like Michigan, California, Georgia, Florida is like being a candle in a hurricane. It's been a difficult process to keep the flame lit. I'd only point back to the farm crisis, and I lived through that farm crisis. When the income stream was steady, payments were on time, but property values had dropped drastically.
Right.
And there was forbearance. And through that forbearance, we, rather than write down property values to some ridiculous level that we were never going to get back, we were able to hang in there with our customer, accept payments on a timely basis, and sure enough, property values came back over time. And I think that is a real important lesson during this critical time.
Well, I would hope, you know, in my frame of reference here, instead of putting more taxpayers' dollars at risk, if we would first pursue efforts to have field examiners implement their authority maybe in a more balanced manner, that would, I think, address part of the problem. Another part of the problem, and that goes to legislation that I and the ranking member have on Mr. Kanjorski and I have on the issue of trying to expand the 12.25% cap. It seems, and I was going to ask Mr. Micah this question, it seems, you know, that we could also provide some liquidity by raising the statutory limit on credit unions for member business lending at this time. And again, that would have no cost to the American taxpayers. I was going to ask you, Mr. Micah, considering that getting into the business of lending into the market requires quite a bit of capital expenditure for one thing. It requires hiring and training personnel. So many credit unions probably don't believe it's a worthwhile endeavor if they're going to quickly hit that 12.25% cap, whereas if that's raised, it might be worth making the investment rather than, you know, if you're just going to handle 5 or 8 loans in your portfolio for your local business, if you're a small credit union, that's one thing. But if you can get, if you know that cap's going to be raised. I was going to ask you, do you agree with that?
The gentleman's time's expired, but the question has been fairly thoroughly discussed.
Thank you, Mr.
So I don't
Chairman.
think we've lost anything. And Mr. Mike and Mr. Sperling have talked about it significantly.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Thank
The
you.
gentleman from New York, Ms. Velasquez.